So let's take a look at how some of the most recent 40k codexes are shaping up, and talk through some strong high-performing lists for the Imperial Knights and the Chaos Knights. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking army lists, focusing on the chivalrous knights of the Imperium and their dark mirror, the fell forces of the Dark Gods. We're going to be taking a look at two strong lists, both from the Imperial Knights and the Chaos Knights, all of which have placed quite highly at tournaments over the past weekend, and maybe just give us a bit of an idea about how some of their strongest lists might play. I must admit, I have been quite looking forward to seeing what people would come up with out of these codexes. Perhaps more so than any books in 9th edition, these just seem to have massive stacking layers of special rules. Perhaps Games Workshop feeling that they can go particularly heavy-handed on special rules on the Knights, just because they don't have so many models in the army. In any case, we'll talk through two lists from each of the factions, and some of the strongest bits about each list. First up, we'll start with the Imperium, and here we have a House Griffith list that was used by Dan Cook to take 4th at the Warhammer World 40k Match Play event. For the tournaments this weekend, a fair few of them used the new Knight codexes, and it's interesting that they didn't actually win any events, but they did place highly at a fair few. I think it was kind of to be expected, really. From initial reactions to the codex, I think the general consensus was that they're fairly strong, but aren't going to be stomping the meta flat in the same way that Tyranids have been. In any case, House Griffith does really seem to be one of the standout Questor Imperialis ones. It's the one that gives you +1 attack in the first round of combat, so a massive melee boost. As a Questor Imperialis household, they'll get bonuses to their advances and charges, and a fight on death stratagem if they need it. The Warlord trait Master of the Joust is also a big thing to attract you to Griffith. It allows you to advance and charge, so it's pretty excellent on a Gallant, and they also have a very nice stratagem for 2 command points for +1 to wound against monsters and vehicles. Dan's listed in a single House Griffith Super Heavy detachment, 2 Armiger Helverins and 2 Warglaves. The Helverins perhaps under the thrall of the Knight Crusader, who can give both of them +1 to hit, and the Crusader takes a Thermal Cannon, Avenger Gatling Cannon and Heavy Stubber. The Crusader has been upgraded to the Exalted Court Gatekeeper upgrade, which essentially gives him transhuman physiology when he's in your own deployment zone. Wound rolls of 1 to 3 always fail against him, and it does mean that the Armigers under his Bondsman ability get +1 toughness when they're on objectives, which doesn't hurt. It's going to be additionally hard to take out with Iron Bulwark for a 4+ invul, meaning that you don't have to rotate on him, and he's going to be good at holding down home field objectives with the banner of Macarius Triumphant, the one that gives him Obsec. It's a pretty handy relic as well that also gives you +1 honour too, meaning that you're decently less likely to fall into the Dishonoured territory. Then we've got a Knight Errant, which I think is going to be one of the most popular picks out of Imperial Knights. This one's armed with the Reaper Chain Sword, Stubber, and of course the Fearsome Thermal Cannon. The Errant's Bondsman ability allows a unit to advance and charge, so it's good for just catapulting a Warglaive towards the enemy, and getting an absolutely crazy threat range with full tilt, which can have them advancing 9 inches. Relics and Warlord traits wise, he has the Armour of Sainted Ion for a 2+ armor save, and Revered Knight, which gives you an additional honour point as well, and also lets him fights first, which isn't any bad thing either. Finally, to round up, we have a Knight Gallant with a Heavy Stubber. He's the nominated Warlord and is a High Monarch, meaning that you can farm potentially extra honour points when you gain one in-game. Between that and the other one's buffs, it seems like you could be getting to Virtuous at least relatively quickly, as well as allowing his Bondsman ability to affect any unit within 6 inches range as well. Gallants give you +1 weapon skill, so he could allow those Warglaves to hit harder. Then, for a bit of extra melee protection, he has Sanctuary for a 4+ invul, has the Griffith Warlord trait Master of the Joust to allow the advance and charge, which could be a 6 automatically with the full tilt stratagem, and also has Landstrider as well to add yet more speed. That's a +2 inch movement, and advance and charge roll dice count as a minimum of a 3. I believe that the Gallant has the average of at least a 28-inch threat range for the charge, so it's quite likely to get across the board very quickly indeed, and certainly give the opponent something to think about. Overall, it feels like quite a balanced list, fairly evenly split between shooting and melee, though in particular in Imperialis with Griffith, the melee is going to be particularly nasty. Next up, we switch over to the Mechanicus for House Taranis, and this one was run by a Eero Saukonen, who used it to take 2nd in a small tournament in Finland called Spring in Graintown. I think it's quite cool that there's a decent example of someone doing well with the Mechanicus and with the Imperialis halves of the Knights, as they do fairly different things. This one's organised into a single Taranis super heavy detachment, Mechanicus giving you access to things like Machine Spirit Resurgence, the 5+ Feel No Pain against mortal wounds, and the innate ability that gives them extra wounds on every knight at the start of the game, and the chance to heal them throughout. Taranis in particular makes knights extra tanky, giving you an extra 6+ Feel No Pain against anything that isn't a mortal wound, particularly on armigers when they have the -1 damage buff up that makes them ridiculously hard to shift. Finally, they also have their very powerful chance for a knight to get back up on death. It's 2 CP for one of the big knights to try it, and roll a 4+ to stand up after they've been slain at the end of the phase. That can be enormously powerful if you get another 4 turns damage out of a super heavy knight. In this list, there's 2 big knights and then 7 armigers. 6 of them are armiger warglaves, so particularly hard to take out with Taranis, and a whole load of Obsec there. The new incarnation of their thermal spears is particularly punishing with the Lay Low the Tyrant's Oath. That's the one that gives you a free hit or wound reroll per night. The oaths are recorded on the list. That one was taken alongside Defend the Realm, the one that gives you loads of extra command points. Otherwise, for the smaller knights, we've got an Armiger Helverin. That one takes the Bastard's Helm with the +1 to wound, and Revered Knights, the one that gets you to start on extra honour again. That one's maybe not the worst idea, seeing as you actually have to kill multiple units per turn to stave off losing honour points from that oath. Finally, looking at the big knights, we've got a Knight Crusader with the Rapid Fire Battle Cannon, Avenger Gatling Cannon, and Heavy Stubber. He's just a super shooty knight, really tuned up. He takes the Master Tactician Exalted Court upgrade, which allows him to take an extra Imperial Knight ability called a Martial Tradition that you can often give to Freeblades. He takes Blessed Arms, which gives him an extra 6-inch range on all his guns, plus Cognis Stubbers become Assault 6 and the AP improved by -1, which is actually kind of meaningful when you've got 2 of them due to the Rapid Fire Battle Cannon. The Master Tactician also allows a discounted stratagem for an Armiger once per game, which doesn't hurt either. Then all of those shots combine really nicely with Blessed by the Sacristans, the one that gives you mortal wounds on 6s to wound with your guns, and then just to add yet more shots to the same knight, is also equipped with Endless Fury as well. In its new form, that just gives the Avenger Gatling Cannon an extra d6 shots. With all of those shots, it does average something like 4 mortal wounds out of Blessed by the Sacristans over the course of one shooting phase. So in general, that knight's just going to be fairly comfortable chewing through most things, particularly big infantry formations. Finally, we've got a Knight Paladin, which is equipped with a Chainsword and Stubber, which only after reading that I do realise that that's now part of the same combo, as it's upgraded with Princeps to allow you to give the reroll ones to hit and wound to the Crusader. That's going to be giving you some pretty spectacular firepower on all those guns in the first place, and ups your average mortal wounds after the Sacristan's thing to something like 5 or 6. He also gives you a small chance to mitigate losing honour points as well, which doesn't hurt. And he brings his own firepower in his own rapid fire battle cannon and a Reaper Chainsword for some melee. He has Knight of Mars to allow you to automatically make one dice a 6, which I guess you could potentially use in combination with the big Mechanicus mortal wounds on 6's stratagem. And he has a 4+ Envol both at range and in melee with Iron Bulwark and Sanctuary. Overall, it's just really quite a cool, very stacked combo on just one Knight Crusader. A huge amount of firepower that's going to pose a massive challenge to just about anything it can see with the amount of mortal wounds it can throw out. All the while, there's a whole ton of Obsec Armigers running all over the place and doing decent damage just with the rerolls from the oath that they swear. I feel like the Knights list do make you make some trade-offs between the big Knights and the small Knights, and it's really quite cool to see what things people prioritise. Switching over to Chaos now, and here we have a House Vextrix list that arguably did the best out of any of the ones out of these 4, used by Mike Twitchell to take second at Mayhem GT, a fairly big one with 70+ players. This one's perhaps the most skewed out of any of the Knight lists, with 0 big Knights whatsoever, and it's just made up of 13 War Dogs. The house used is House Vextrix, so one of the Infernal ones, the Dark Mechanicus type Knights, and Vextrix shooting just works excellently with those Demon Breath spears, as it allows you to reroll both one hit roll and one wound roll when shooting. A really enormous buff when you're firing out with 2 very powerful shots each turn. Infernal is also the one that allows you to cut your own health and take D3 mortal wounds, and then select either Transhuman Physiology, +1 to wound on a weapon, or extra movement if you need it. I feel a lot of the time it is maybe a bit of a borderline trade-off with just how much damage you're taking, but in the right situation it could just give you an enormous leg up in one critical turn. Say if you just need to deal some excessive damage, and you just have every single War Dog turn on +1 to wound to absolutely obliterate the enemy. Out of the War Dogs, there's 9 Brigands that have just been absolutely maxed out. The Brigands are the ones that are armed with the Demon Breath Spear, the Twin Melter Weapon, and then the 12-shot Avenger Chain Cannon with the Strength 6 and AP -2. And to be honest, it's not really too hard to see why they're just one of the easiest units to spam in the whole codex. They're really quite fast at 12-inch movement, get objectives secured, pack a fairly decently powerful anti-tank weapon, particularly with the Vextrix rerolls, and then an absolute ton of infantry shots with 12 high quality ones from the chain cannon and then even another 4 from the heavy stubber. They're just not really going to be useless no matter what target you shoot them at, and when you have that sort of thing plus fast moving and obsec, it's going to be a recipe for them being very strong and hard to deal with in big numbers. Just the raw stats for damage output, if all of these guys did get to shoot for a turn, is pretty silly. Against toughness 7 or 8 vehicles, I think you average something like 55 wounds or so just from the Demon Breath Spears alone. Never mind the casual 144 anti-infantry shots that are dealt by just the Brigands. Otherwise, outside those 9 Brigands, there's 3 War Dog Huntsmen. They take the Melter Guns, and they've also got the Demon Breath Spears and also a Reaper Chain Talon. It means that they're pretty decent against most targets in melee as well. And then finally there's one single War Dog Carnivore, the new dedicated melee one, and he's a slightly swifter melee beast with Eager for the Kill for +1 to advance and charge. And he also takes the Traitor's Mark, a relic that prevents enemies from using Insane Bravery or any reroll morale rules, as well as the bearer being able to pick up an additional Harbinger ability. Otherwise, there's really just not that many upgrades whatsoever. One of the War Dog Brigands takes Warpborn Stalker to allow it to deep strike into the battle. Incidentally, that does mean that if that one's killed, it can have a chance to resurrect itself on death with the Undivided stratagem. And one of the War Dog Huntsmen is armed with the Helm of Dogs relic. That gives him +1 attack and a reroll 1s to wound aura for nearby War Dogs. Not too bad when you've got this many of them. Overall, it just certainly looks like a very intimidating list. 156 wounds of knights with invul saves, all of them very fast moving with obsec and packing some obscene firepower if they can manage to bring it to bear. It seems that an all War Dog list certainly is very viable. Lastly, and to round out our look at the Imperial and Chaos Knights, we've got an iconoclast Chaos Knight household, this one from the indomitable House Hepretrax. This list was used by Nicholas Venker to take 3rd at the Warhound Games Grid GT, and this one is the only one not just to use a single super heavy detachment, it also makes use of an auxiliary detachment too. The core detachment is House Hepretrax, that's the one that gives you extra wounds, so extra durability on the knights, 2 extra wounds for the War Dogs, or 4 for the super heavies, and it is an iconoclast household, so it's extra dangerous in melee, +1 attacks and an extra AP -1 in your first round of combat, a pretty brutal combo of buffs, particularly on lower AP things like the Abominants. Speaking of which, there is a showing for the new big Psychic Knight. The Knight Abominant takes Vortex of Terror and Winds of the Warp. Winds of the Warp is the near mandatory one to give him a Feel No Pain and potentially some War Dogs nearby too, and Vortex of Terror is a debuff one, giving the enemy -1 leadership, and whenever they attack they must take a Dread test or be -1 to hit. He's fairly well stacked with the upgrades, taking Knight Diabolus, perhaps one of the strongest warlord traits for the big knights in my opinion, an extra attack and reroll hit rolls of 1, an extra warlord trait in Aura of Terror, which means that when you're within dread range, morale and dread tests must be taken on an extra d6 and drop the lowest, so most things in the game will have at least a fair chance of failing. He's got Blessing of the Dark Master, which will prevent you from re-rolling hits or wounds against him. If he gets favoured, then unmodified hit rolls of 1 to 3 will always fail as well, so make him yet tougher on top of that Feel No Pain and the Hepretrax buff. And finally, he has the Soul Raptor Swarm, an upgrade on his Terror Shades that give him a 4+ save against mortal wounds, and when models flee within dread range, you also get to heal him 1 wound as well. This thing is just fantastically tanky, and you've got a fair few leadership shenanigans for using those dread abilities as well. You could potentially pull some pretty nasty things like enemies suddenly failing a dread test and having half their charge distance and maybe being sat out in the open. Next up we have a Knight Desecrator. That's the one with the big laser destructor anti-tank weapon and also hits on 2s as well. He takes the relic laser destructor in the Diamonus and a warp strike claw for melee. The Diamonus gives the gun 3 shots at strength 16, AP -5 and damage D3 +6, so that is a seriously scary anti-tank weapon right there. He takes the favour of the Dark Gods for Mark of the Dread Knight for the 6+ Feel No Pain, which will go to a 5+ if he completes his favoured target. and he's a good one to be putting on objectives as he takes Infernal Quest to grant Obsec. Finally, for the big knights, there's a Knight Rampager. That's the dedicated melee one, the equivalent of the Gallants, that also will allow your Wall of Dogs to reroll ones to hit near him as well. He takes the Veil of Medrungard, a 4+ invul against range and a 6 in melee, and Bow to None, a Warlord trait that allows him to ignore modifiers to characteristics. Finally, he picks up a massive defensive buff in Beguiling Majesty, the one that gives enemy units -1 to hit and wound in melee. So comparatively, he's spectacularly hard to take out there. If he gets favoured, then that gets souped up with a -1 attack aura as well. Finally, for the Hepretrax detachment, we've got 2 Wardog Carnivores. One takes the Blood Shield for the chance to ignore invuls with that big Warp Strike claw, and the other becomes a Psycho with the Tzeentchian Pyrothrone. That one uses the Storm Malevolent, the psychic power that makes one enemy unit easier to kill in melee. You get +1 to wound against them, and also 6s to wound them cause 1 mortal wound to a maximum of 3. Pretty nice both for the War Dogs themselves and maybe the Rampager. Finally, and interestingly, we've got a super heavy auxiliary detachment. It seems to be used to take a couple of Wardog Executioners as a Dreadblade, otherwise you wouldn't be able to give 2 different favours of the gods to the 2 different carnivores. In the auxiliary are a couple of Wardog Executioners. They're Iconoclast Dreadblades with the Worthy Offerings Fellbond. That's the one that gives them +1 to hit against vehicles, monsters, or characters, so not too bad for hunting those with those nasty autocannons. And also, if you kill one of those, then you trigger the Favoured ability. Only one of them can take a favour, and one of them picks up Mirror of Fates from Tzeentch, which allows you to farm a command point for a 5+ chance to gain a command point every turn your opponent uses a stratagem. And if that one does happen to get favoured, then once per battle you can change a hit, wound, or save to a 6. That could be a pretty big deal, as it could guarantee you an important save. Overall, it's pretty cool to see a more traditional take on a Chaos Knights list doing well as just War Dog spam. I'm not surprised that House Hepretrax does attract a bit of attention. Seems kind of hard to argue with just a whole bunch of extra defense, and then combine that with the decent offensive capabilities of Iconoclast, and you've got a tougher and fightier army. I think that the Worthy Offerings Fellbond War Dogs are also quite fun. Seems like quite an efficient way of making use of a Fellbond. So anyway, let me know what you think of the list. Do they tally up with what you were expecting might be run in tournaments? Or do you think that there's going to be new combos and more powerful stuff that have yet to be uncovered? As always, I appreciate any insights as to how the lists were played. If you know other interesting things that I've not mentioned, please let me know down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. And if you have been enjoying a lot of the stuff on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description. Making all the videos for the channel does take a fair amount of time and effort, so if you are enjoying quite a bit, any support is enormously appreciated. Channel patrons get a few advantages, including seeing certain videos early each week, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.